living. Look around, see what's gonna be. Living only starts when it's not about me. You're blessed with blessings, you say. It's a gift when you give it away. That's how this life was meant to be. It may not nearly, mealy, 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 shiny, atzmi, money, 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 money. It may not nearly, mealy, 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 shiny, atzmi, money, 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 money. It may not nearly, mealy, 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 shiny, atzmi, money, 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 money. It may not nearly, mealy, 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 shiny, atzmi, money, money, money.
Good evening, my holy sisters and brothers. How's everybody doing? We are opening a new tractate. That was 8 Days singing their song, This Life, based on the teaching from Pirkei Avos 1:14, the famous saying from Hillel, if I am not for me, who will be? But if I'm for myself alone, what am I? And if not now, when? It's so great. He leaves it so ambiguous, but the message is so clear. Stand up, be counted, seize the day, jump in, figure out why you're in this world, and do it. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we open Tractate Rosh Hashana, the 9th volume of the Talmud on a Monday evening? Yehudit in South Carolina, Bill in Missouri, John in Maine, Nancy in North Carolina, Belle in Texas, Carol in Cleveland, Renee in Indiana, Peggy in Colorado, Paula in Chicago, Sharon in New Jersey, Lucy in Minnesota, Patrice in Utah, James in Indianapolis, Zach in Washington State. Over there on the YouTube side, Aoife in Florida, Lynn in North Texas, and Gigi in British Columbia. Welcome, everybody. A few words of introduction as we head into this new tractate. Yesterday we made a siyum on Beitzah, the laws of festivals. Now we go right into Rosh Hashana. And these are the laws of Rosh Hashana. But what's great about this tractate, even though it's even a little shorter, it's 35 pages, is that it's there's a lot of technical laws like any volume of the Talmud, but there's also some real philosophical questions that come up in this tractate with respect to time and the nature of time and the calendar and who determines the calendar. And we jump right into that question with the first Mishna, that according to the sages, we celebrate New Year's 4 times during the year. And what does that mean? And we're going to be explaining it. But we go right back to this central seeming contradiction in the Torah. I mean, we're all so accustomed to saying, well, Rosh Hashana is the beginning of a new Jewish year. We just celebrated it, and we entered the new year, 5782. And that Rosh Hashanah celebrates the birthday of the world. Almost. The idea is that Rosh Hashanah was the 6th day of creation when the people appeared and were able to register in their minds that God had created the world. And this partnership between God as creator and we, the creation, being invited by God to step up and be counted and make our mark in this world, to help repair the world, to help augment the world, to help make this world. Our mission is to transform this world into a proper place for God to manifest God's presence, right? To make it a home for God, holy enough for God. And so we're asked to step up. Now, the Torah does not mention Rosh Hashana at all, calling it Rosh Hashana. In fact, God says in the Torah specifically that this month, meaning Nisan, in the springtime, when we celebrate Passover, the anniversary of our redemption and our exodus from Egypt, the Torah says, this shall be for you the first of months. So it would seem like that would be the beginning of the year, that we should be celebrating New Year's at Passover. At least the Passover is the 15th day of the month of Nisan. You would think that the first of Nisan might be New Year's Day, but it's not, right? We celebrate it instead at Rosh Hashana. And the seeming contradiction, why is it like that? Rosh Hashana is, of course, mentioned in the Torah, but it's mentioned as the day of blowing the shofar. How did that become the official New Year's Day? Why isn't it the first of Nisan, as the Torah says, this shall be the first of the months for you? How did the sages resolve this contradiction between the first of Nisan and the first of Tishrei? They say there's not just 2 New Year's days, there's 4. It's such a Talmudic resolution to the problem. Well, if we can't decide, or we don't have a good rationale, like there's a contradiction in the Torah between 2 dates. Actually, we can point to 4 dates, and that just shows that there's a tension in this question, and that we're going to have to live with 4 different days. That's how they approach it. And now Rav Steinsaltz says in his introduction to this tractate that the sages hold that time, even more than festivals, cannot be measured as an abstract concept, but must be connected and intertwined directly with observed reality. Recall that in ancient times, any month would only begin when witnesses came in and said they saw the correct sliver of the moon that you would see on the first day of the month. And then they testified that they saw it in front of the Sanhedrin. And then the elders of the Sanhedrin declared that the new month has begun. That's the procedure spelled out in the Torah. Eventually, they said we can calculate in advance when the months will all begin and when the years will begin. And that's the scheme that we have now. We don't have witnesses testifying before a Sanhedrin. We can know years in advance when each date is going to fall out in the lunar Hebrew calendar. That was not so at the time that many of the sages were debating these laws. It didn't get established until Hillel II that we would follow that sort of pre-calculated calendar. But the sages were discussing that possibility for a long time, and particularly when the Roman persecution was getting heavy. And they said, we might not always have a Sanhedrin capable of receiving witnesses and issuing a declaration that the new year has begun, and so we better just sort of calculate the calendar in advance. But something was lost when we did that. This idea that each month, right, is sort of like we partner with God in recognizing that even though there are natural cycles, of the astral bodies, the moon, the sun, the stars, the planets, etc., and they're going to follow very regular motions, nevertheless, the fact that humans recognize what's going on in the heavens and read it and are impacted by it is very important. If the calendar is the calendar, we kind of lose that participation in the calendar. We're just, in a sense, we're ruled by it, and we weren't meant to be ruled by the calendar. The sages will also point out that, as they understood that as you moved away from Jerusalem, that different times, the time that the night started and the times that the days came and that the calendar itself would shift. Even though they lived in a very small geographic portion of the world, they did understand that the sun sets at different times depending where you are in the world. And that, in a sense, they understood time zones, right? They understood time zones. Later in our journey through the Talmud, we'll see when we really get into astronomy, according to the sages, and the way that the zodiac is something they were very aware of, their understanding of the movement of the heavenly bodies was incredibly acute for people that did not have telescopes. But that's not going to be in Rosh Hashana. Still, we will be covering somewhat of the calendar in this tractate. At any rate, Tractate Rosh Hashanah has 4 chapters. Chapter 1 discusses these various new years that can be measured and the practical applications of each, and it also begins with the topic of the testimony of witnesses before the court. Chapter 2 discusses the manner of examining those witnesses when they come to declare that a new month should start. Chapter 3 is primarily concerned with the sounding of the shofar, the really distinctive feature of Rosh Hashanah. And the 4th and final chapter discusses a Rosh Hashanah that coincides with Shabbos. And the main thing is we don't blow the shofar when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos. All right, let's get into it. Chapter 1, we open Tractate Rosh Hashanah, the 9th volume of the Talmud. As we always do, every tractate begins on page 2. That's the way the numbering is done. Mishnah number 1. They are 4. The days in the year that serve as the new year, the Rosh Hashanah. Do they actually say that? Yeah, Rosh Hashanah, right? So there are 4 days which serve as the new year. On the 1st of Nisan is the new year for kings, and it is from this date that the years of a king's rule are counted. Why don't we count the years of a king's rule from the day that the king, was anointed, and ascended to the throne? We'll discuss that. And the 1st of Nisan is also the new year for the order of the festivals, as it determines which is considered the first festival of the year and which is the last. Right, now we've talked about these festival cycles, the cycle of the pilgrimage festivals, Passover, Shavuos, Sukkot. It's very much tied to the harvest, right? So in the springtime, we bring the Omer offering. Right, so that's going to be right on the second day of Passover. That's in the spring. Then Shavuos, when we celebrate the giving of the Torah. That's also when the first of the week comes, and that's around in June, more or less. And then the fall holiday of Sukkot, and those comprise a unit that goes in that order: Passover, Shavuos, Sukkot. Now, Sukkot comes after Rosh Hashanah. So you might have thought that, well, if we count the years from Rosh Hashanah, we entered 5782 at Rosh Hashanah, that the pilgrimage festivals should go Sukkot, Passover, Shavuos. But they don't. A cycle of pilgrimage festivals is counted Passover, Shavuos, Sukkot, which tells you it's more like the solar year, right? Or the year as it's measured and counted outside the Jewish scheme. Why do we do that? Why are those a unit in that order? And we'll be talking about that. The Mishnah continues, on the 1st of Elul, so the first of the month before Rosh Hashanah, right? Rosh Hashanah is the 1st of Tishrei. The month before Tishrei is Elul. And so the sages of this Mishnah said that the 1st of Elul is the new year for animal tithes. All the animals born prior to that date belong to the previous tithe year and are tithed as a unit, whereas those born after that date belong to the next tithe year. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon say the new year for animal tithes is on the 1st of Tishrei. That's an example where there's an anonymous Mishnah, which presumably is the majority of the rabbis saying it should be the 1st of Elul. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon dissent, right? They issued the minority opinion, and the law was established according to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon. The year for tithing animals was established as the 1st of Tishrei, the regular Rosh Hashanah. On the 1st of Tishrei is the new year for counting years. As we do, we count the years, right? The date changes. The 5782 began on Rosh Hashanah. So the 1st of Tishrei is the new year for counting years, as will be explained in our Gemara. It is also the new year for calculating sabbatical years and jubilee years, right? The 7-year Shemitah cycle, where every 7th year the farmers would not plant seeds in the land of Israel. And then 7 times those 7-year cycles, and you get to the Yovel, the jubilee year, which comes every 50 years. And there they don't plant for 2 years, the 7th year and then the 50th year. The 49th year and then the 50th year. And God provides so much abundance prior to that the people don't starve, the farmers aren't planting for 2 whole years. I.e., from the 1st of Tishrei, there is a biblical prohibition to work the land during those years, the sabbatical year and the Jubilee year. It is also the first, it is the first of the year for planting. In other words, for determining the years of Orla, the 3-year period from when a tree has been planted, during which time its fruit is forbidden. And for tithing vegetables, as vegetables picked prior to that date cannot be tithed together with vegetables picked after that date. On the 1st of Shvat, the Hebrew month of Shvat, which is the month during the summer, right? So when is Shvat? No, I'm sorry. Shvat is in the spring. On the 1st of Shvat is the new year for the tree, the fruit of a tree. Wait a minute. When is Shvat? I should have looked this up before. Now I don't want to say something stupid. Give me a second. Hebrew months in order. What? Yeah, show results. Okay, Tishrei, Heshvan, Kislev, Teves, Shvat. Yeah, so I was right. So Shvat is before Adar, so it's like about February, right? Shvat is about February, January, February. Okay, so where am I? So the 1st of Shvat is the new year for the tree. The fruit of a tree that was formed prior to that date belonged to the previous tithe year and cannot be tied together with fruit that was formed after that date. Very similar to the law of the vegetables that get tithed, in one year or in the other, but the fruit of trees has a different date for the same purpose, and this ruling is in accordance with the statement of Beis Shammai. But Beis Hillel say the new year for trees is on the 15th of Shvat, and the law follows Beis Hillel in this, and it was established that Tu B'Shvat is the new year of the trees, and it also later became a kind of Valentine's Day in the Jewish calendar. Okay, that is the Mishnah. Let's get into it. The Gemara on this Mishnah number 1. And it's not a very long page, and we're going to do the whole daf today. We're going to do the whole page, so let's keep it moving. So the new year this is the Gemara, the new year for kings, with regard to what halacha is it mentioned in the Mishnah? Why is it necessary to set a specific date to count the years of a king's rule rather than counting them from the day that he ascends to the throne? I mean, if you look at these other new years, I mean, they're really involved in legal principles, right? The order of the festivals and the fact that if you take a vow to bring an offering, you have to do it within the next cycle of festivals. And if you miss it, then you missed it when you should have done it. It has real legal implications. Tithing, whether it's vegetables or trees, counting the years, etc. Like all those have serious legal ramifications. But why is it the sages opened with this is how we count the years of kings, even before all of those, and then what legal significance does it have from what year we count, how many years has a king ruled? And Rav Chisda said, it is for determining the validity of documents, right? We've touched on it a few times, and we'll get into it a lot more about halfway through our journey when we get into Bava Kama, Bava Metzia. There's a lot of texts in the Talmud that have to do with regulating transactions, regulating business relationships to make sure that they are legal and fair. And a lot of that has to do with documents. So much of the law, as you can imagine, I mean, this is a code of law after all. And if you think about just American law or the law of any nation, they have to have standards for creating contracts, for creating legal documents. And the first thing you're going to see on any legal document is the date. And you have to understand what that date is. In ancient times, it was customary to, not just give the date of the year, but also in what year of the king's reign did this happen, since government flowed from the king, which was unfortunate. This is why the Torah was not so positive on the Jewish people having a king. It should only flow from our king in heaven. But that's what happened, right? The Torah made an allowance for that you could have a king if you wanted to have a king, and the people eventually demanded to have a king. And then Saul was their first king, and then David, and then Solomon, etc. And once kings came into the picture, they would measure the years from, how many years had the king's reign continued. And when did they start? Not when the king ascended. It was the common practice to date documents in accordance with the years of the king's rule. Therefore, it was important that these years begin at a fixed time so that one knows whether a particular document was antedated or post-dated. As we learned in a Mishna, antedated promissory notes, in other words, promissory notes that were dated prior to the date on which the loan actually took place, such notes are invalid because a loan document creates a lien on the borrower's property. By dating the document earlier than the loan itself, the lender has a fraudulent mortgage on the property, which can be used against any future purchaser. Therefore, the sages ordained that any promissory note which is antedated, dated before the actual loan was made, it does not establish a lien, even from the true date of the loan. If you make an antedated promissory note, you've done nothing at all. But a post-dated promissory note, meaning I lend you the money and then the promissory note actually kicks in later than when the loan was made, that note is valid, as post-dating the note presents no opportunity for defrauding a purchaser. The sages taught in a baraisa, and that is the law. The sages taught in a baraisa, if a king ascended to the throne on the 29th of Adar, the month preceding Nisan, right? And we saying the first of Nisan is the new year for kings. So if he came onto the throne one day before that, the last day of the year before the new year for the king, so if he ascended on the 29th of Adar, once the first of Nisan arrives, although he reigned for only one day, a full year is counted toward his reign. His first year of rule is completed from the first of Nisan, but if he ascended to the throne only on the first of Nisan, one counts an additional year toward his reign only a year later when the next first of Nisan arrives, right? So whatever day a king starts his reign, when the first of Nisan comes, a year gets added, right? So even if he only ruled for one day prior to that, he gets a full year added to his reign. But if he ascended on the first of Nisan, he won't count that year until the following first of Nisan. And the master said, citing the baraisa, if a king ascended to the throne on the 29th of Adar, once the first of Nisan arrives, a year is counted toward his reign. And the Gemara comments, this teaches us that Nisan is the new year for kings. And it also teaches us that one day in a year is considered a year. Although this king ruled for only one day, a full year is counted toward his reign. And the Gemara asks, consider the next clause of the baraisa. But if he ascended to the throne only on the first of Nisan, a year is not counted toward his reign until the next first of Nisan arrives. Well, isn't this obvious from the fact that if he ascended on the 29th, he gets, a year's credit for that one day of ruling? So now we know that the first of Nisan arrives, it's a new year. So if it ascends on that year, it's already in the new year, and he shouldn't count that year until the next first of Nisan arrives, so that he's already ruling when the first of Nisan hits. Isn't that obvious? And the Gemara explains, it is necessary for a case where it is necessary for the baraisa to explain this outright, for a case where the princes agreed to appoint him as king already in the month of Adar. Now, lest you say that since the decision to appoint him king was already made in Adar, once the first of Nisan arrives, they should count it as the second year of his reign, even though he doesn't ascend to the throne until after that day has passed. Therefore, the baraisa teaches us that the count begins only from when he actually began to rule. Next subject, and we're on the top of the B side of page 2. The sages taught in a baraisa, if the king died in the month of Adar, and another king succeeded him to the throne in that same Adar, one counts the year to this one, i.e. the previous king as his final year, and to that one, i.e. the new king who began his reign in Adar. Right? So if an old king dies and a new king comes in anytime, before the first of Adar, so we're learning that final year counts for both, that year counts for both kings. It's the last year of the outgoing king and the first year of the incoming king. In other words, it could happen that if you sort of add up all the years that people are ruling, it's going to add up to more years than are between, one date and another. And it's because the last year of a king gets added to his count, and the first year of the new one also gets added to the incoming king's count of years. If the first king died in the month of Nisan and another king succeeded him in that same Nisan, one counts the year to this one, the previous king, and to that one, the new king. But if the first king died in Adar and another king succeeded him in Nisan, one counts the first year to the first king as his final year and the second year to the second king as the first year of his reign, and there won't be any doubling of years. And that would happen when the old king dies before the first of Nisan and the new king ascends after the first of Nisan. And it could easily happen that the nation is without a king for a while. After the old one dies, maybe they have a period of mourning, maybe it takes a while until they appoint a new king. It's not like when a president of the United States dies while in office and they get that vice president sworn in, within minutes, if certainly hours. There can be a break in the continuity of kings. And the master said, if the king died in Adar and another king succeeded him to the throne in the same Adar, one counts the year to this one, the previous king as his final year, and to that one, i.e. the new king as the first year of his reign. And the Gemara asks, isn't this obvious? It flows from the fact that you said, if it's before Adar, no matter how many days he rules, the new king gets counted that year. And, somebody died in that year. Why wouldn't they count that year for him? So why does it need to be said that both kings get a year added to their tally when this transfer of power all happens before the first of Nisan? Why does it need to be said? And the Gemara explains, lest you say that 1 year cannot be counted toward two kings, and so the entire year should be counted only toward the previous king. The Baraisa therefore teaches us that the years of two kings can overlap and be counted in a single calendar year. Both be counted in a single calendar year. And the Gemara cites the next phrase of the Baraisa, if the first king died in Nisan, and another king succeeded to him in that same Nisan, one counts the year to this one, the previous king, and to that one, the new king. Same result as if both died in Adar before the new year of the kings. We're going to have the same result if both died in Nisan after the new year of the kings. Both are going to have a year added to their tally. Why does that need to be stated now that we just said that the same thing happens if one dies and the other one comes in both during Adar? Why does this need to be said? And the Gemara explains, lest you say that when we say that 1 day in a year is considered a full year, this only applies when the day is at the end of the year, i.e., since his reign will continue in the coming year, that day is considered like a whole year. But if the day is at the beginning of the year, we should not say that the beginning of Nisan is counted as another year. Like if you might say that, well, this old king, made it to the new year for kings, and then he died a day later. And then a new king came in, and that new king was the ruler for, let's say 363 days. Are we really going to say that the old king got a whole year added to his tally of years? Answer, yes, we are. And that's what the Baraisa is teaching us. It was further taught in the Baraisa, but if the first king died in Adar and another king succeeded him in Nisan, one counts the first year to the first king as his final year and the second year to the second king as the first year of his reign. And so the Gemara asks, well, okay, now that we've established all these other rules, this is so obvious. Why does it need to be stated that if the old king died in Adar and the new king came onto the throne in Nisan, that the old king got that year, his final year counted on his tally, and the new king gets the new year counted in his tally? Why does that need to be stated? We would have assumed that that's the way it is. And the Gemara explains, no, it is necessary for a case where the princes decided to appoint him as king in Adar, and he is also a king, the son of the previous king, so that his succession to the throne is automatic. Lest you say that by the time the first of Nisan arrives, 2 years should be counted toward his reign. Therefore, it teaches us that one counts only from Nisan when he actually succeeded his father to the throne. So even though everybody knew that as soon as the old king died, and that his new king, that his son was going to become the new king, and everyone agreed that his son was going to become the new king, there was no question that his son was going to become the new king, but he didn't get anointed as the new king, then we don't start counting the years until he is anointed. New subject, Rabbi Yochanan said, from where is it derived that one counts the years of kings' reigns only from Nisan? All right, now we understand how we count the years based on what that date is, and how, the death of the old king, where it falls, before the New Year for Kings or after the New Year for Kings. But now we're getting to the more fundamental question. This happens all the time in the Talmud, that before examining the basic question, the sages go to a more nuanced question, because it's like they were all such experts that the more nuanced question was more interesting to them. But now that we established kind of the more nuanced question, let's go to the basic question. Why is the first of Nisan considered to be the new year for kings? Why did they pick that date? They could have picked the first of Tishrei and had the same rules applied to it. Why was the first day of Nisan selected as the new year for kings? As it is stated, and it came to pass, this is from the first book of Kings, chapter 6, verse 1, and it came to pass in the 480th year, after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Iyar, there it says Ziv, but it's Iyar, which is the second month, the next month after Nisan, which the Torah calls the first of months, that he began to build the house of the Lord. Now this verse juxtaposes the reign of Solomon to the exodus from Egypt. And just as one counts the years since the exodus from Egypt, from Nisan, when the Jewish people left Egypt, so too one counts the years of Solomon's reign from Nisan. And the Gemara asks, and from where do we derive that we count the years from the exodus from Egypt themselves from Nisan? Perhaps we count them from Tishrei. Why are we measuring the number of years since we left Egypt from Nisan? Why not Tishrei? I mean, it does make sense because God said when we were all still in Egypt, if you look at any Torah, right, which begins at the beginning, and we just started, right, last week, or the week before last, was Parshas Bereshis. Last week was Parshas Noach, Torah portion Noach, the story of Noah, and the one before that was Bereshis, in the beginning. And if you look at Rashi's commentary on the first words of the Torah, in the beginning of God's creating the heaven and the earth, not in the beginning God created, it's in the beginning of God's creating of the heaven and the earth. At any rate, Rashi comments on that the Torah could have begun, this shall be the first of the month for you, right? You shall observe Rosh Chodesh. When the Jews were about to leave Egypt is when God starts giving them laws, halachas, mitzvahs. And the very first mitzvah given to the nation of Israel, there's mitzvahs in the Torah that were given earlier, like be fruitful and multiply, but those were given to all human beings. This shall be the first of months for you, and that Rosh Chodesh, and that you will observe the new moon as the beginning of the month, right? That months will begin with a new moon. That was the first commandment given to the Jewish people as the Jewish people. And Rashi says the Torah could have begun there. Why does the Torah begin all the way back at the beginning of creation to establish that God made the world and God is sovereign over all people and all things and all planets and the whole world. Right? God created the world, therefore God can say what the law is. That's why the Torah begins there and not with the commandment about the new months. Okay, so now we're learning that, okay, so we measure the years from since we left Egypt from the first of Nisan, and since when Solomon is building the temple, it talks about what year in his reign that happened, and it's juxtaposed to a measurement of how many years since we left Egypt. This is going to be the source for the sages to say that kings will count the years of their reign from the first of Nisan. And if you ask, well, perhaps we should count the years since we left Egypt from Tishrei, the Gemara answers, it should not enter your mind to say this. As it is written, and Aaron the priest went up to Mount Hor at the commandment of the Lord, and he died there in the 40th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt in the 5th month on the first day of the month. That's Numbers 33:38. And it is later written, and it came to pass in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first of the month, that Moses spoke to the children of Israel. That's Deuteronomy 1:3. Now, from the fact that when the Bible speaks of the month of Av, which is the 5th month, and it calls that year the 40th year, and when it speaks of the following Shvat, it also calls that year the 40th year, the implication is that the new year does not begin in Tishrei, in terms of the Torah counting years from when we left Egypt. Were it the case that the new year begins in Tishrei, Av and the following Shvat would not be in the same year, would not both be in the 40th year. It would be that Moses was speaking to the people in the 41st year. But it's not. We know we were 40 years in the wilderness, and that's how we know that we count the years since leaving Egypt from the first of Nisan. The Gemara raises an objection. Well, granted, in this case of Aaron's death, it is explicitly stated that the year is counted from the exodus from Egypt, as it states, in the 40th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt. But with regard to this other incident of Moses' oration, from where is it known that the year is counted from the exodus from Egypt? Perhaps it is 40 years since the establishment of the tabernacle in the wilderness. And the Gemara answers, in accordance with what Rav Papa said in a different context, and by the way, I'm almost done, so if you've got questions or comments, get them in. In accordance with what Rav Papa said in a different context, that the meaning of one instance of the expression, the 20th year, may be inferred from another instance of the expression, the 20th year, by way of a gezerah shava, a verbal analogy. Meaning that if one word is used in one part of the Torah and it's repeated in another, the laws in the first context will apply to the second context where the laws are not defined and require definition. Here, too, the meaning of one instance of the expression, the 40th year, may be inferred from another instance of the expression, the 40th year, by way of a verbal analogy, a gezerah shava. Just as here with regard to Aaron's death, the count is from the exodus from Egypt, so too here with regard to Moses' oration, although this is not stated explicitly, the count is from the exodus from Egypt. The Gemara raises another question. Even if this serves as a proof that these two events both took place in the 40th year from the exodus of Egypt, from where is it known that the incident of Aaron's death in Av took place first? Maybe the incident of Moses' oration in Shvat took place first, in which case it is possible that the years from the Exodus are counted not from Nisan, but from Tishrei. Just because Moses giving his speech to the Jewish people is listed later in the Torah doesn't mean it actually happened later, because we've seen that there are places in the Torah where events that happen later are listed before. How do we know that this was the sequence of events? The Gemara rejects this argument. It should not enter your mind to say this, as it is written that Moses delivered his oration after he had slain Sihon, Deuteronomy 1:4. And when Aaron died, Sihon was still alive, as it is written. And when the Canaanite, the king of Arad, who dwelt in the south, heard tell that Israel came by way of Atharim, and he fought against Israel in Numbers 21:1. What report did he hear? He heard that Aaron had died and that the clouds of glory had withdrawn from the Jewish people. And he thought that he had been granted permission to wage war against the Jewish people. They were weak, they're vulnerable. Now they're clouds of glory, which were associated with Aaron, that everywhere these millions of people went during their 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, there was this massive cloud above them that kept perfect temperature control over the encampment. So it was never too hot, never too cold, but perfect. But then when Aaron died, the clouds of glory went away. That's why they're associated with Aaron. And these neighboring kings said, oh, well, maybe the protection of their God has disappeared, and now I can wage war with them. That was a bad miscalculation by that neighboring king. And this is as it is written. And all the congregation saw that the word Aaron was dead, and they wept for Aaron 30 days, all the house of Israel. Now, we're already at the top of the A side of page 3, so this is going to be continued tomorrow, how we learn out this relationship between the clouds of glory and Aaron. We'll continue there tomorrow. Let me make a note. Not there. Okay. Let's go to your comments and questions. Come on, reload Google. Okay, Rosh Hashana number 2, questions. Sharon, I am working with my students on mitzvahs, commandments. They just learned about the calendar. One of my brilliant 11-year-old students came up with this abbreviated. It makes perfect sense that the first commandment is the calendar. As slaves, they had no control over their own time. The calendar is the perfect symbol of freedom. 100%. Your 11-year-old student nailed it, right? A people that cannot determine its calendar is not a free people, right? And the Jews now leaving Egypt and no longer subject to the Egyptian calendar and all the idolatry that was surely embedded in the Egyptian calendar will no longer apply to the Jewish people, the children of Israel, now going out into the wilderness and to receive the Torah and to have a completely new scheme of measuring time and serving God. Sharon, Tu B'Av is the Jewish Valentine's Day, not Tu B'Shvat. I'm such a dingbat. Thank you. Exactly. Tu B'Av happens in August, and it's a week, 2 weeks, or 1 week after Tishrei B'Av. Tu B'Shvat is the birthday of the trees, and we make this the Tu B'Shvat Seder, right? And why does it come that early in the year? This is from when we count fruits of the new year. Sorry, I was just having a brain, blip. Okay. Bell. So if there was an overlap in the reigns of the kings, how would that be reflected in a legal document if we want a date certain? And the answer would surely be, you're still going to have that it happened, in the first of Av, or the month and date are going to be in that legal document. It's not like you're going to leave that out. And if there's going to be any ambiguity, they're actually, first of all, they're going to know. I think they probably would just include, back then, so 2,000 years less than we are now. So maybe like a year like 35, 33 or something like that. We're in 57, 82, so maybe 35, 33. But if they listed a month, right, a month and a date, and they said that it was in the final year of so-and-so's reign, or it was in the first year of so-and-so's reign, they would know when the kings ascended. To them, that was not that ambiguous at all, because the one thing everybody knew is when the king ascended, right? It was such a big part of their lives. Anytime you were traveling on a road, it was like on the king's highway, that kind of thing. So it was almost like people are more aware of when the kings, died or a new king ascended than they are of the numerical value of that year, right? So that's why it was important to be clear on what year you're counting in the tally of years of a king's reign. Bill, was there a consistent list of the princes who would appoint the new king? Did they correspond to the tribes, to the major families of the kingdom, or a mixture? Not entirely germane, of course, but all this discussion is causing me to wonder how kings ascended. Yeah, I mean, it was supposed to be hereditary, right? It was given to Saul, and it was going to pass to Jonathan, but Saul messed up, and so God told the prophet to tell Saul, you're out, right? Shmuel told, the prophet Samuel told Saul, it's not going to happen for you. Too bad, right? I think Samuel had already died, but Saul consulted this medium necromancer who spoke to the spirit of Samuel, who first was annoyed that he'd been bothered in the world of souls, and second told, no, Saul, you're dead, and not only that, you're not gonna keep the throne, and you're gonna be with me tomorrow. This is on the eve of a big battle. You can read that in the book of Samuel, which is a beautiful, colorful, dramatic book. Such a dramatic book, the book of Samuel, 1st and 2nd. So when did it happen that there was this committee of princes that would appoint a king? Maybe what we're learning here is that some of these laws were also applied to the northern kingdom while it lasted, right? After Solomon died, his son was a disaster as a king. The kingdom split in two, and the descendants of David remained the rulers in Judea, and eventually the Messiah will be a descendant of David. But in the northern kingdom, right, who got to be king and why, a different story. And definitely there was lineal succession, but I guess not always. I have not made any kind of a study of, when was there a break in that linear succession of kings. I mean, eventually Herod became king during the Second Temple period, and forget about it. He was not the descendant of anybody. He had no royal lineage. He was born a slave, I believe. So there were breaks, and there were times when people not anointed by a prophet, but somehow were able to seize the power, and that wouldn't happen in a vacuum. He had to have the support of some powerful people, and it's presumably those powerful people that are being referenced here. But I don't know that much about it offhand. And Sharon, does counting of the same year to two kings' reigns mess up cumulative tallying of years, adding up a total number of years under royalty inaccurately? It could. But I don't think it matters that much unless you're adding them up and you don't understand where in the calendar it broke. Where it really was relevant is as a daily matter in writing up a contract, right? That, I'm making this loan to you on the 5th day of Av in the 6th year of Solomon's reign, or I'm selling you my house, on the 8th of Tishrei in, the 20th year of Ahab's reign, right? That kind of thing. And then everybody involved would know. When we're talking about tallying up the years, right, there are definitely people who use like the years of the Hebrew kings' reigns to sort of help set up, the sort of sequence of years of some kind of, the Bible as history. But that's not really the subject that we're talking about here. And I don't know that much about it. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. I apologize again that I got Tu B'Av and Tu B'Shvat mixed up. They're really far apart. Shvat is like January, February. Av is like August. Maybe July, but usually August, September. So I was all wrong there, and I apologize for that. Okay, my friends, with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, for page 3 of Tractate Rosh Hashana. Have a wonderful evening.